YouTube. But once again, it's Kennard Vernon Stewart here for the podcast. We're talking Auburn football. This is Auburn football sports talk here on Vernon Speaks Sports Auburn. And as always, it's great to be an Auburn Tiger War Eagle. Forgive the background noise. I am actually outside doing a video about Auburn football. We're going to be talking about a little bit recruiting this morning. And when it comes to recruiting, I think there's some blurred lines, some gray area in Auburn recruiting practices that a lot of fans, they get caught up in the statistics, the top 10 recruiting classes, things like that, to where they sometimes kind of misconstrue the effectiveness of recruiting as a whole. So there was a comment that was left by Cole Brand. I don't know if he was a subscriber or maybe just somebody passing through to leave a comment. Definitely appreciated the comment. And there were some valid points in the comment that he left. So he basically said that Robinson Threezy, Carlton Davis, Jamil Dean, and Blake Countess is a reflection of good recruiting practices by the Auburn Tigers. I say yes and no. I think they were all four very talented players, which I have a lot of respect for, both professionally and athletically. However, Carlton Davis, yes, was recruited right out of high school, out of Florida. He turned out to be a very, very good cornerback for the Tigers, probably one of the best that Auburn has had in some time. You could probably go back to 2004 and see a cornerback that was a shutdown corner. You can look his name up. You know who he is. Now, here's the thing. When we talk about Auburn recruiting, although having top 10 recruiting classes, let's really dissect this thing for a moment in an educated kind of way. Yes, Auburn, that's a fact. Auburn had top 10 recruiting classes. But when we look at the totality of the class, the quality seems to be kind of diminished because in a lot of classes, you have two top guys, 5-star, maybe high-end 4-star recruits that really inflated the particular class. And as you go down, in some classes, the lowest ranked player is 75. So let's just say if Auburn had recruited more so quality in the middle, those roster builders, those 92s, those 93s, those 94s that are not necessarily elite but can transform to an elite player, Auburn really didn't do a good job of getting those in the past few years up until now. Now, if you give me this argument, say in the last two recruiting classes, I would say I couldn't argue with you. I couldn't give you a thumbs down. I couldn't give you any type of rebuttal in that regard. But years prior, no, sir. Auburn has not done a great job when it comes to recruiting defensive backs, especially. Here's an indication of sketchy recruiting practices. Whenever you have to depend on the transfer portal to staff your recruiting classes, I think that gets you into a lot of trouble, especially when you absolutely need these transfers. Let's look at the quarterback position. In Gus Malzahn's tenure up until now, all of the successful quarterbacks in Gus Malzahn's era have been products of the junior college transfer market. One, Nick Marshall, arguably one of the most entertaining, one of the most effective quarterbacks in Auburn history, took Auburn to the SEC championship, subsequently took Auburn to the national championship. He won the game for him. I mean, you take away the last drive, Nick Marshall took Auburn all the way to the national championship and all but won the game for the Tigers, surrendering a pass in the red zone for a touchdown. Auburn loses that game to Florida State, one of Florida State's better teams in recent history, with Jameis Winston as the Heisman Trophy winner. Oddly enough, ironically enough, from the state of Alabama, Bessemer, by way of, wins that game over Auburn 34-31. He also actually had a better quarterback outing statistically in 2014, showed his potential as a passer, maybe even in pros, but he was selected in pros as a cornerback. but didn't do a bad job passing the football in 2014. Then goes a couple of years later, Auburn has to depend on the transfer portal in a successful way with Jarrett Stidham. Jarrett Stidham takes Auburn to the SEC championship in 2017, arguably one of the best runs in Gus Malzahn's career, starting off kind of shaky, but going on an epic run, which included wins over Georgia and Alabama, who were both number one teams in the country at the time, beating them mercifully. But going into the SEC championship, Jarrett Stidham, now see, here's the thing about that SEC championship. Auburn actually had a huge opportunity to put that game away early, go up 2 scores, but a turnover in the red zone by Jarrett Stidham, that changed the course of that game. Because if you look at how that game was going up until that particular turnover, it looked like it was going to be a repeat from a couple of weeks prior when Auburn pretty much manhandled Georgia in Jordan-Hare Stadium to put themselves on the map. And then following that up with a 26-14 win over a pretty good Alabama team that eventually won the national championship, oddly enough, against Georgia. So, depending on the transfer portal, yes, Auburn got a couple of good quarterbacks. Now Auburn has Bo Nix. I think Bo Nix has the potential to be a pretty good quarterback. I think he has the capability with the right guys around him. He is not a game manager. He is a game takeover type quarterback if you put him in his comfortable element. But let's get back to the point of this particular video. We're talking about defensive backs now. Going back to Cole Brand's comment. If you look at up until now, Auburn has not done a good job of recruiting defensive backs, elite defensive backs. That's why I think a guy like JaQuincy McKinstry out of Alabama, which Auburn doesn't recruit well in Alabama, could be a home run recruit for the Tigers. Will Auburn land him? I think I'm kind of iffy on the odds. A lot of things that are going in his favor, in Auburn's favor in recruiting him, is the fact that he was teammates of Bo Nix. He was also coached by Patrick Nix, who was the head coach at the time, but now Patrick Nix is now the head coach at another recruiting hotbed for the state of Alabama in Phoenix City, Central Phoenix City, where there have been a lot of great players coming out of there who have made national championship appearances. They seem to have a streamline at Central Phoenix City with Alabama and Clemson. Maybe Patrick Nix, in going down there, can actually change that particular trajectory. Maybe those guys can start being influenced to go to Auburn. Who knows? That has yet to be seen. But whenever you have a situation in recruiting where you are depending on a junior college transfer to take a very pivotal role in your secondary, if you don't land him, you're screwed, basically. Or if you are doing what Auburn has had to do in the most recent history in converting a wide receiver to cornerback, hoping that the shit works out, then that's where the lines get really blurry. And that's when the reactive nature of Auburn's recruiting comes to a head. I think that is starting to fizzle out, though. I think Gus Malzahn and his staff, because see, a lot of times with Auburn football, all the good is Gus Malzahn never gets credit for it. But when it comes to the bad stuff, Gus Malzahn is at the forefront. If the team does bad, okay, Gus Malzahn can't coach. But people don't realize there are a lot of other coaches on the team that are making upwards of at least $300,000 a year that share some level of accountability in development of the players. Also, from a recruiting standpoint, Auburn has done much better. I think Auburn is on a upward trail in recruiting. So what can this look like moving forward? Okay, so I look at Auburn when I really started to take Gus Malzahn's tenure seriously is around 2017. 2013 to 2016 was really just a cluster of coaching changes, dependence on the transfer portal, and just some really misses when it comes to recruiting. Even some of the 5-star recruits that Auburn has gotten just didn't pan out. But have you noticed some things? Not as many disciplinary issues with Auburn. When was the last time Auburn had to kick a key player off the team? You got to look at stuff like that. Auburn goes 8-5 in 2018. They go 9-4 in 2019 with a 9-win season. That's a 2-win swing from the prior year at 7-4. So things are on the up and up. Now, how you can trace, let's just assume we have a season this year. How you can trace whether Auburn is progressing is not necessarily if they win an SEC championship this year. The way you see if Auburn is progressing is if they go from 8-5, well, 7-5 to 9-3, and then to 10-2. That's the same level of progression that Clemson had before their championship run. That's the same trend that Georgia is starting to go through, because I expect Georgia, with the talent that they have, to start to legitimately place themselves from a roster standpoint to a regular in the potential regular in the college football playoff. The only thing that's holding Georgia back, which holds a lot of SEC teams back, is the fact that you got to compete in the SEC. Look at the recruiting classes. The SEC recruits in the top teams in the SEC recruit at least in the top 5. LSU, Florida, Texas A&M, Alabama, all those teams, that's who you're going up against every year. So if you're going to win those games, a lot of times, either you got to outmuscle those teams or you got to be kind of lucky. Just like Florida last year, they got kind of lucky on some games. Like thinking about their game against Auburn. That was luck. LeMichael Pirine running an 88-yard run is luck. That is not his stilo as a running back. But he did it, and subsequently that put that game away for Auburn. That was a huge win for Florida, a big loss for Auburn, but Auburn still in the hunt. That was a dogfight. I really enjoyed watching the Auburn and Florida game. Matter of fact, that is one of the only games from last year that Auburn lost that I could actually stomach looking at, because it was a very entertaining football game. And the bad thing about the SEC is the fact that some of the traditional rivalries, like the Floridas and the Auburn versus Florida, Auburn versus Tennessee, some of those rivalries they had in the SEC East, the unfortunate part about this is that Auburn doesn't play them but every 4 years because of how the conference is laid out. I think, maybe the commissioners, I don't think it's going to be an easy fix. I don't think they're even trying to fix it. But it would be great to see an Auburn-Florida game a little bit more often, like we did back in the early 2000s. So when you talk about Auburn recruiting, yes, they are headed in the right direction. But up until now, the Robinson Threezy, the Carlton Davis, that argument is really not all the way valid. It's a fact. It is a fact that is what happened. They got those guys, but the way they got them, especially Jamil Dean and Blake Countess, that's just a product of retroactive, reactive recruiting. I think Auburn is moving in the right direction, headed towards being a team that can win 9 to 10 games on a year in and year out basis, not because of the coaching, not because of the talent, but because Auburn competes at a high level against some of the best teams, the best players in the country. 5-star, I'm talking about legit 5-star recruits, like George Pickens, for example. Just think if George Pickens would have come to Auburn and you team him up with Seth Williams, that would have been lethal. That's one to two more wins for Auburn last year. All right, guys, what do you think of this particular video? I love talking about Auburn football. I am Kennard Vernon Stewart, your host here for Vernon Speaks Sports Auburn. This is yet another episode of Auburn Football Sports Talk. Go ahead and do something with the video. Like it, don't like it, comment definitely. Subscribe to Vernon Speaks Sports Auburn. We're moving in a very, very good direction, headed towards 3,000 subscribers. I'm about a little under 200 away, I think, to get to 3,000. Thank you for the support. This is actually close to the anniversary of this particular channel. And as always, it's great to be an Auburn Tiger War Eagle.